So we'll start in a minute.
We'll start in a minute. Just hang on. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Hi, Darlene. Hi, Eva. You're first.
Hi, Cheryl. Darlene.
Cheryl. Hi, Jyoti. From New Jersey, from Louisville, from Albuquerque, from Boulder. Everybody is coming in from Taos. Hi, Suzanne. Stacy, all right. Stacy from Wyoming. Hi, Alyssa from Idaho. Gosh, we're all over the place.
Hopefully it's less smoky where you are.
Yeah, we can hardly breathe here. Smoke is right behind us. Hi, Barbara from Denver. I guess we're ready to start. There's a little time lapse between.
No, Estes Park and the fires in Estes Park and north of Fort Collins.
Yes.
Cuba, Mexico.
Paula, hi Paula. All right. So I'd like to introduce Jody Shevins. The Homeopathy School International is sponsoring her with a webinar about menopause. And I'm sure you guys all get very helpful information out of this and love for you to enjoy it. And Jody will start now. Bill, can you show me and bring up the PowerPoint?
We'll be right with you. This is my first webinar.
Screen sharing has started.
One more thing, to get that slideshow without losing the box. Okay, very good. Hi, Samir. Welcome, everybody. It's I'd like to say it's good to see you, but of course I can't see you. So I have to know in my heart that you're there, in my brain. So today we're going to talk about homeopathy and menopause. And it's certainly, I want to say, not only is it a big topic, but it's conceptually it's a big idea in terms of, is it a problem and why is it a problem? And so I'd like to talk about why we think of it as something that we have to do something about, and I'd like to talk about cross-cultural influences. This is a problem everywhere. And then we'll talk about how to understand the root causes of the problems with it. And we will talk about some of the common homeopathic medicines that we use for it. We'll talk about what level we prescribe on homeopathically. And we'll talk a little bit about other supportive measures that we can use. And that's what we're going to do. So here we go. So what is menopause? Menopause that happens naturally as opposed to because of drugs or surgery means the end of the ability of a woman to reproduce. It's the end of her ovary creating functional follicles, and it's generally a gradual process, somewhere on average between, well, 47 and 55. And it basically, we know someone's through menopause in hindsight because the definition is there's been no menstrual periods for 12 consecutive months. There's a formal definition, which as you can, that the WHO says we stage it, so it is the transition, and that is an increase in FSH and either increased variability in the menstrual cycle, that means too long, too short, too soon, too late, or 2 skipped cycles with 60 days or more of amenorrhea, which means no period. And basically, that's when it starts, when the periods become unstable. And I like to think of it as estrogen deregulation. Basically, we lose a lunar control over the process, and things start to deregulate. There's also surgical menopause, which means if a woman has surgery and her ovaries are removed, then she goes into sudden, overnight, immediate menopause. And that is really in many ways experientially violent, very different than a gradual, natural aging menopause. So if someone has a hysterectomy and she's got her uterus removed, then she still cycles. And when I work with people, and one of the things I notice is it's important for the woman to notice when she's cycling, either by mood changes or water retention or food cravings, that we can support a woman better after surgical menopause, after hysterectomy, if we track her cycle. And here's something I've really only learned in the last, I'd say 5 years or so, that after menopause, a year after women's periods have stopped, she's still cycling, most women. Some people kind of flatline, that they're just the same all the time, but a lot of women are lightly cycling for many years after their periods stop. And again, I find that's a very helpful thing to notice, because if a woman is in fact, she hasn't had a period in 3 years, but she's premenstrual, she tends to think she's just, well, kind of crazy, and or depressed or anxious or can't sleep. But when we can notice that actually she's lightly cycling and she's having a little bit of PMS, not so much to cause a period, but enough to make her a little uncomfortable physically or emotionally, oh, someone must be having a problem, then we can deal with it in a supportive way, and it just helps emotionally for a woman to know, oh, she's actually cycling lightly, as opposed to, why is she feeling so strange, and we can support her. So basically, if you don't have a uterus and you're still cycling, it's important to notice when menopause does actually come, and then we can give a woman the support she needs. Okay, so other things will cause menopause. There are certain diseases which will cause the cessation of the menses before whatever her natural programmed time might have been. And diabetes or thyroid disease or autoimmune disease can cause an early menopause. By the way, with a hysterectomy, sometimes we can have an earlier menopause. Many cancer treatments will shut down ovarian function, chemo and radiation, and there are numerous medications that will also cause menopause. And this was an interesting fact. I didn't know that twins often have an earlier menopause. So why do we have menopause? Well, nobody knows. And I don't think that it's because we're supposed to die when we can't reproduce. Cultures where people are well-fed and well-nourished, women can live and have lived well into old age. There's one hypothesis, and granted it's just a hypothesis, that it's called the grandmother hypothesis, and it means that maybe there's an advantage to having non-childbearing women who can help out in child raising while the younger more physically capable members of the group can go out and get food and protect. And so it might be an evolutionary advantage for women to be free of reproduction and help out in the group. Oh, I'm going to take a moment and read this. Here we have a comment. I think you can all read the comments, that a tubal ligation can also, here's someone here sharing that their tubal ligation led to an early menopause. And that is a very interesting comment, because tubal ligations, some women have no symptoms from it whatsoever, and other women have a change in menstrual function, in menstrual cramping, in the length of their cycles, and clearly there's some kind of feedback that we don't understand that well, that when the tubes are cut, we lose some kind of hormonal feedback in the situation. Okay, so what is perimenopause? As you can see in here, I think perimenopause means changes around the time before your period stop. And basically, as your ovaries are deregulating and changing, we get all kinds of interesting symptoms. And there's not a hard definition here. And many women say to me, you know, I'm 41, I'm 42, and my periods are different. And actually, many women in their mid-40s, if they pay attention, may notice around ovulation and before their period, they start to have little hot flashes. And they're interesting. They're not usually bothersome. And like you see here, I call it periods in your 40s. They're different. They're different. And so this is a time period where some women are very uncomfortable, and I'd say more women are probably, it's just changing slowly. So it's very important to me to understand menopause in the context of a life and in a societal value of women. And also just how is menopause different than aging? Because many of the symptoms of menopause are symptoms of aging similar to that men experience with aging. And I think just coming with women, it's such a turning point. It's such a switch to have been menstruating for your entire adult life and then to stop menstruating, that you're faced with, oh, I'm not a young woman anymore, I can't have a baby, I'm not going to look young, and it's instead of it being so gradual, you have this demarcation in time that you are no longer a reproductively valuable woman. So I think of it as, not everyone agrees with me, as a kind of reckoning that youth is over. And we can try to be young, and I have a value, my own personal value, that it's important to make peace with, okay, you're somewhere around 50, and some things worked out and some things didn't in your life, and you probably have a future, and I think there are some things we can do, and there's some things we can't do over again. We did that, it worked, it didn't work, we made the best of it, we didn't, and I feel like in terms of aging, in terms of facing a future where our bodies are changing, the greater peace we can make with what worked, what didn't work, who we are, where we're strong, where we're weak, and face the future as a time of using what we've learned, gaining wisdom, making a difference in our lives, in society, through what we've gained. That sets a stage where menopause can be more comfortable. I think when women see it as a time where, okay, the party's over, and now we're just going to sit around and deteriorate till we die, this does not have a positive effect on the symptoms of menopause. I want to just, so we have a question here. Yes, perimenopause in our note is a time when you can unexpectedly get pregnant. When some perimenopause, or a change in ovarian function, does not mean you can't get pregnant. It's harder to keep a pregnancy. There are more miscarriages, and there's more chromosomal damage in such pregnancies, but still the majority are normal. Okay, so I think it's very important to hold menopause in who are you, what's working in your life, and where are you going in life, because you're going somewhere, and it could be somewhere great. For me, it's very important to look at, well, is this just a problem of civilization? Is it because we have artificial lights, or we sit and look at screens all day instead of be outside exercising? Or is it civilization? Is it aging? Is it diet? Is it stress? So I was very interested to learn about what happens in other cultures. And so we're going to talk about that for a little bit. So what I have said here is in some hunter-gatherer societies with high parity means you have one baby after another, and long periods of lactational amenorrhea, meaning while you're nursing all these babies, you're not having a period. So there are...
Screen sharing as resumed.
Ooh. Can you all, I don't know if you can hear me, I have lost my box. Bill has to bring back my box, but I'm going to keep talking. So in societies where people hardly ever menstruate because they're either pregnant or nursing, it's not such a big deal, menopause, because if you go from not menstruating very often to not menstruating, it's not a big change. It just would look more like routine aging. And in those, so okay, so that's one step. Now also social factors. So what this means is women who live in a society where the more status they gain by being an older woman who is wise and powerful, say a matriarchal society, they have less menopausal symptoms. So basically, the more power and status and recognition and self-worth one experiences, the less symptoms we have. I'm going to ask you to excuse me 1 minute because I've lost the view of your questions. What do you mean?
Just to make that small.
Okay, so now you're looking at my screen, and there's, okay, you can see fine. Thank you, Laura, for letting me know, and you can hear me loud and clear, but your screen's less beautiful. So I'm going to go to the next slide and see if we can, you're just going to look at my slide a little like this for a moment. So cultural factors. So we'll just do it like this for the moment. In the United States, it was looked at women of different ethnic and racial backgrounds. Did they have different symptoms? So white women in the United States tended to get more nervous, have more memory loss, vaginal dryness, decreased libido, more hot flashes, and night sweats. That are the kind of symptoms that white women in America had. And in the United States, African American women, the main symptoms that women complained of were painful sex and hot flashes. So they had were more in tune with the vaginal dryness end of things. Japanese women have less symptoms than Chinese women. No, I don't know what that means. And this always amazed me. Most common menopausal symptom in Japanese women was shoulder pain or frozen shoulders. And so we know that we have connective tissue issues. And in Japan and in China and historically in Mexican women, hot flashes weren't particularly a big issue. I am going to switch screens so I can just check in to see if you're having, I want to read your questions. That's a good, no, we're good. Okay, so. Okay, All right, so now I go back to my slideshow. You put me back on the slideshow? Okay, forgive our awkwardness. India, let's go over to India. So women in India have an earlier onset of menopause, and the main complaint there is vision. So what does this mean? It might mean that the actual menopausal symptoms aren't so profound, but in fact it's just aging symptoms. When women in rural and slum areas were compared to urban Indian women, the rural women had a more positive outlook. They were glad to be free of bleeding, and the urban women were less positive because they were more concerned about their physical and health factors. And this may just have something to do with the priorities in poverty. Most common symptoms, very similar: vaginal irritation, joint pain, loss of libido, irritability, and weight gain. So those are some of the charming issues of menopause. So why is menopause a problem? Well, the truth is, for some women, it's not. You hear of women who say, well, they're just, they didn't have any problem. One day their periods just stopped and life was grand and they felt all sexy and strong, and there are women like that. What are the most common problems that people complain of? In my work, in my experience, probably hot flashes, and the biggest, what's the problem with a hot flash? Like women who are chilly, hot flashes can be kind of pleasant. But the biggest problem with hot flashes that women explain to me, number one, is that it disturbs their sleep. And the loss of sleep then makes everything else worse. And some women feel embarrassed by them because why? They turn red and sweat, and then somebody knows they're in menopause, and menopause implies something about who she is sexually. I think that's what's underneath why it might be embarrassing. So hot flashes, problems with sleep disturbance, and then of course fatigue, problems with a thinning and drying of the vaginal and vulvar tissues, which can leave women, leave them more uncomfortable with intercourse, leave them more vulnerable to urinary tract infections, and a dry and uncomfortable sensation. With lowered estrogen, women often have lower sexual desire and arousal. Mood changes, women can feel more irritable and anxious and depressed. And why is that? Is it because they can't sleep? Is it because of their issues philosophically, emotionally about it? It's different in different women. Cognitive problems, problems in thinking, in memory, in spelling. What do we call it? Menopausal noun aphasia. What was that word? I know the first letter. And sometimes that's aging, and sometimes that is the changing estrogen levels and function. Also, we have osteoporosis, and we have joint and connective tissues issues. These are the problems. And separating them out from normal aging and from fluctuating estrogen levels is something that we try and figure out clinically, really. So why do people get hot flashes? Again, I want to say what we have in answer to this are theories. Basically, we have something called our thermoneutral zone. We have to maintain a core temperature to live and have proper enzymatic function in the body, and it's maintained by a number of mechanisms in the body. If you get too hot, we sweat. If we get too cold, we shiver. We have ways to maintain our thermoneutral zone. Women with a lot of flashes have a set point of their thermoneutral zone that's narrower. So this is a vasomotor deregulation. Basically, your blood vessels are opening and closing and bringing blood to the surface in a kind of herky-jerky fashion. And there are a number of theories about norepinephrine levels, about different serotonin receptor types, about serotonin levels, and this can get destabilized and erratic. And it's interesting that some women, if they take an SSRI, drugs like Prozac, often it will help with their hot flashes. But this is a real chicken and the egg kind of process, because if we're anxious about the hot flash, then we have more hot flashes. If we believe that we're in better shape, we have less hot flashes. So where our beliefs and relaxation interact with our chemistry is very circular. So during menopause, this thermoregulatory zone is narrowed. So we have less tolerance to core temperature changes. And what happens is a release of heat, you're sweating, discomfort. Some women get nauseous, some women get weak, some women get some amazing releases of heat that leave them feeling terrible, and they're not the majority. I know women like to call it power surges. Very few women feel powerful while they're having a hot flash. And, but it's a powerful thing, or it can be. In general, women with more hot flashes have less tolerance for core temperature changes. If someone's always been very sturdy, it doesn't matter if they're hot or cold, they're not usually bothered so much by that. So are hot flashes good for you or bad for you? I always thought, well, if this happens to most women as their ovaries start to calm down, and we have this idea of a grandmother hypothesis where if we live longer and help take care of the young in the community, then there must be some survival advantage. And if any of you have ever had a niacin flush, a hot flash feels a lot like a niacin flush. And so, which means this kind of stinging hot burning sensation. And a niacin is used to help clear the arteries of cholesterol and help improve cardiovascular health when there's high cholesterol. And I thought, well, wouldn't a hot flash be like that? Kind of, you know, rotor out your blood vessels midlife, give you a fresh start. And that was my idea. But recently I found some data that if someone gets hot flashes and they start either in your 40s but around the time of menopause, in fact, that's associated with a decreased level of strokes, heart disease, and death. I like that. You can really feel good about your hot flashes. Now, if someone didn't have hot flashes during menopause, and then menopause went on for 10 years, and at 63 you start getting hot flashes, this is a sign of cardiovascular illness, and actually then it has an increased risk of heart disease and stroke and death. If someone's getting hot flashes around menopause, I think to be able to tell a woman, in fact, this is good for your heart, will lower the stress around them, and anything that lowers stress actually lowers hot flashes. Okay, so what's the bad thing about hot flashes? Okay, a bad thing is that women who have much more intense hot flashes, that seems to have an association with more memory problems. But we don't know really if one is causal, they're just associated. Okay, so what do we do about this? Obviously, the conventional medical approach that has gone in and out of favor kind of rapidly in the last 15 years, in and out, are hormones. That as women deregulate with their estrogen, the conventional treatment has been, well, take estrogen, take progesterone, take testosterone, take DHEA, take thyroid, take a hormone. And what I want to talk today is not what's a natural hormone. I want to talk about what are alternatives, what's ways of making our bodies as healthy as possible so that your body can either feel comfortable in the gradual and normal diminution of estrogens and progesterone, or we can optimize making those hormones on our own. Our ovaries make those hormones, so does our fat cells and our adrenal glands. The liver makes a little bit. So it's not a great time of life to be too skinny, actually, because fat cells make hormones. Okay, so for the most part, taking hormones has become controversial. We don't exactly know. We see times where taking the hormones, we've said, oh, it inhibits breast cancer, it inhibits dementia, it inhibits cardiac disease, and then we've seen studies that say actually it gives you a stroke, it doesn't help with those things, and I'd like to say it's really it's a study in process. And we have a question here, what about bioidentical hormones? A great question, and I think that bioidentical hormones is a catchphrase for using hormones that are not made from pregnant mare urine, Premarin, pregnant mare urine, that they're made from what? From plants, from chemicals that make them look just like our own estrogens. And it basically what it means is more naturally made hormones that people generally do saliva or other kind of blood testing to create a individualized cocktail of hormones similar to the kind in your body. And my problem with this, and I do have a problem with this, mostly the name, is that if we're worried about, at least in one case, breast cancer, estrogen-sensitive breast cancer, being caused by prolonged exposure to estrogen, and that breast cancer is triggered by whose estrogen? Our estrogen. And if we make a bioidentical estrogen and take that, for me, in my mind, well, that doesn't really change our cancer risk because it's our own estrogen that stimulates the cancer risk. And that's my main objective to the whole approach. So I prefer, since it seems like our cancer levels are lower if we have less lifelong exposure to estrogen, using estrogen is not my first approach. I do, honestly, in my practice, use it. I use the plant-derived hormone derivatives, but it's not. It's usually my last approach. Usually, I like to do lifestyle, homeopathy, diet, and then supplements, herbs, and then if that doesn't work, then I'll use the plant-derived hormones, and I try and use it as minimally as possible because we really don't know what the long-term effects will be. So hormones is one approach. A lot of women who become anxious and depressed, either what's the chicken and the egg here because they're worried about aging or they're losing sleep. So in many women, taking an antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication, pharmaceutically or herbally or some other way, then helps. Because, for example, those of you who've had a hot flash know that it can feel distressing, and you know that having a big emotion can trigger a hot flash. So an anxious thought, a fear thought, a happy thought, an orgasm, a big laugh, any big emotion that probably just causes a little blip in adrenaline, any adrenaline surge will in fact trigger a hot flash. And so learning to, at the onset of a hot flash, calm down, like deeply relax, will often minimize it. I have a question here. Estrogen is stored in the fat cells in women's thighs. Women with liposuction have less risk of heart disease. Is that a question? Okay. These are comments. Yes, having less fat means less heart disease, but there's a balance between having no body fat and being obese. So that's how I'd understand that. I have a question here. What about estrogen dominance? If during the deregulation that happens as our ovaries wind down in their function, if progesterone's going down faster than estrogen, in fact, you'll have estrogen dominance or progesterone deficiency type symptoms. And that's why in those women, things that support progesterone function, or some women just take a little progesterone, they feel better. So the chemistry of estrogen and progesterone balance is also a work in process, and that's something that people who do the bioidentical hormone approach, where they're testing and balancing, they utilize those ideas. I often have found working from the symptoms, I can get very good results determining how to go up and down with hormones. But it's not my preference, and it's not going to be my core of this talk for the moment. But you can send me more questions about it if you want. All right, so lifestyle. Do women who exercise have less hot flashes? Some do, some don't. And some women, there are a number of studies that showed that women if they had women exercise and then look at how they felt the next day, some women had less hot flashes and some had more, and it was correlated with their attitude about hot flashes. So women who felt they had some power over their hot flashes had less hot flashes the next day, and women who felt they didn't have any control over their hot flashes had more, not even the same amount, but more hot flashes the next day. Again, hard to tell what's causative here and what is a response. Lifestyle. So exercise, most women who are fit and in shape just feel better and feel better through menopause. But that might be, like as Colbert calls it, truthy rather than truthful. It seems like if you're more fit, you'll feel better. But in my general idea about aging, you'll get more of Jody's philosophy here, is that what I see as people age, men and women, is that the thing that makes the biggest difference in aging well is having a sense of meaning, purpose, and connection in life. And then after that is exercise. And then comes diet and everything else. And so along with having a reason to be alive, I think that anything anybody can do, especially as we reach middle age, to figure out how to bring exercise into your life like religion makes a huge, huge difference. To be fit and feel strong and competent, to be capable. I don't know of any other thing that makes the biggest difference cognitively, physically, emotionally, energy-wise, sexually. All the issues that come up with menopause are helped in that way. So temperature regulation. So the obvious thing with a hot flash is to not get too hot. And so these hot summer days are an issue to dress, this is all sort of very obvious, but to dress appropriately, to have layers. And one of my favorite tricks, especially for women who are embarrassed to show that they're having a hot flash, is to freeze a water bottle and then take it with you to the ball game. So then when it hits, well, you had a water bottle, it looked like you were going to drink, and you can put it on the big vessels. You can put a frozen water bottle on the vessels of the neck, of the wrists, the ankles, the groin. You can't put the cold water bottle on your groin, that look weird. But you can put it on your neck and be very nonchalant and chill your body temperature. But to cool down as soon as it starts really helps minimize it, to cool down and to relax. And sleep habits. Many of us, especially since these are women who are in the habit of, if they've raised children, of getting everybody in bed and washed and brushed and put to bed, and then you're alone and it's dark and quiet, and staying up half the night just to get a little quiet alone time. And this has some long-term negative effects that this is a habit I see a lot of women get into. But by the time you get to menopause, many women, not all, many women now are raising children through menopause. To develop regular sleep habits really helps. A regular bedtime, a regular waking, a cool, dark, very dark room really helps. Diet, we can talk about diet at length. I think I'll save that till a little later. And then we have all these tools. And we're going to talk about homeopathy today, but any system that a person works with the whole person, not just their ovaries or their hot flashes, but what the weaknesses or strengths are in their entire body and organ function, is going to work better than just targeting the hot flashes. A couple of other comments that have come in. Estrogenic foods. This is such an interesting question. Because on one hand, we could talk about like the BPA and plastics, and I recently had someone who had, she was a full 8 years post-menopause, and she'd been having hot flashes and mood swings the whole time, and we had optimized everything. And she was still having some pretty intense hot flashes. And I said to her, well, what about plastic? And she said, oh, I drink water all day long from plastic water bottles that she was keeping in the car. And so we took her, I had her drink only from metal and glass bottles. And I actually think it made a difference. Although if you think about it, would drinking from plastic bottles increase the estrogen in menopausal women? I don't know, but it's not an approach I would take because it's toxic. And I don't want to give you estrogen by giving you broken down plastic chemicals. But I think in terms of imbalancing our hormonal axes, certainly all the plastics in the environment are a problem. Oh, and I just read something last night. Never drink from your garden hose. They're full of lead, not to mention the plastic breakdown of the hoses. So it's a double whammy. And someone asked about soy, which I'll take the moment to answer here. Soy, like a lot of products, is a weak estrogen. So what this means, a weak phytoestrogen, a plant-based estrogen, means that it can bind to an estrogen receptor, but it binds weakly. That means, not per week, but it means that if someone has too much estrogen and they start taking in a lot of a weak phytoestrogen, it'll compete for those receptors, meaning instead of having full-strength estrogen in the estrogen receptor, you have this weaker symptom. So women who are over-estrogenized, it can modulate it by competing, versus women who have no estrogen, a weak estrogen binding could bring it up a little. And so it could help their estrogen levels. So it's not more estrogen or less estrogen. There's a very individual response to it. So, for example, I had a woman who came to see me. She was fine, 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 and then she started drinking soy shakes, doing like a diet program and eating soy bars, and it was the all soy all the time, edamame, tofu diet. And she had wicked hot flashes. And I said, well, let's do an experiment. Go off the soy. She went off the soy and her hot flashes went away. Then I have other women who come in and they have hot flashes, and I put them on. I say, well, why don't you have a little soy? Drink a glass of soy milk or eat some tofu or edamame every day, and their hot flashes went away. So it's a complex issue using phytoestrogens, because depending on someone's estrogen receptor sensitivity, it will make things better or worse, and I find it's worth an experiment. Soy, of course, is a controversial food, especially the GMO soy. What I'd say is got non-GMO organic soy. Soy should be eaten in moderate to small doses. I don't think it should be the main protein in the diet. Okay, enough about that. Someone asked about corn. That, I believe, will depend on the individual. There's a lot we could say about diet, but I think what I'll do is I will save that till the end, depending on how much time we have, and we can have our slightly awkward discussion here because I'm being brought little cue cards about your question. Okay, the mind-body, I've been talking in and out about that because if we're upset about a hot flash, it makes the hot flash worse. And anything that can sort of cool the mind and have a, we could call it mindfulness, or we could call it, how about that, a hot flash. Very interesting, as opposed to, oh my God, a hot flash actually makes a hot flash milder in most people, not in everyone. In some women, this is much more severe and a much stronger approach is necessary. I in no way want to minimize how intense this is for some women. So the lifestyle factors, the attitude, enough sleep, but also enough rest and enough play. Our cortisol levels are really affected by having downtime, by having an in-breath, by having an ability to replenish. So adrenal dysfunction, so women who are stressed out, who are over-adrenalized, who are always in fight or flight, generally have a lot worse hot flashes. And that's where the building in some rhythm, some downtime, some meditation, whatever it is for you, People Magazine, watch TV, whatever cools your jets so that you can relax on some regular basis, even a minute every hour to just take a breath, even a breath before we eat. All those mindfulness, relaxation really come home to roost during menopause. So stress management's very important. An anti-inflammatory diet. So what do I mean by that? I guess I'd come around to diet sooner than expected. Anything that puts the body in an inflammatory state and in an adrenalized state will aggravate hot flashes and all the other symptoms of menopause, especially connective tissue and mental function. So too much or too little. If someone is overeating, if they're getting too much sugar, especially sugar and alcohol, or if they're deficient, they're not getting enough nutrients, they're not getting enough of their B vitamins, they're not getting enough minerals, they're not getting enough protein.
Screen sharing has resumed.
Okay, screen sharing has resumed. If we have too much, if we have too little, these things have to be corrected. And so homeopathy, I can prescribe homeopathically, and it's going to help you make the best of what you've got. But if you have a dietary deficiency, that's going to have to be corrected through diet. Alcohol is probably the single most, besides hot drinks, the single most common trigger I see of hot flashes. And so I usually have women during the most intense years of it, which is usually going to be the year before and a couple of years after the period stop. That's a good time to save alcohol for a later time in life. You can have your cocktails later, but it's a good time to avoid alcohol. There's just, I guess in some women, if alcohol is relaxing, then it will help. But for many women, especially if there's any less than optimal liver function, because the liver also balances and metabolizes our estrogen, if there's any reason to think that her liver is functioning less than optimal, if she's had a lot of toxin exposure, heavy metal exposure, a history of exposure to drugs that we store in our body, any reason why her liver might be compromised in any way, I just say it's a good time of life to not have alcohol. Or plan ahead. If you're going to have some alcohol, it might be a hot day tomorrow or that night. Or drink alcohol at lunch, not with dinner, so that you're not having the hot flashes disturbing the sleep. Sugar, and by that I'm talking about simple sugars, refined sugars, juice, dried fruit, alcohol, white sugars, the whites, white flour, white rice, anything that's going to cause a rapid rise in blood sugar can cause a hot flash. So working with that, and that's a place where, let's say someone has terrible sugar cravings, well maybe that's where we're going to prescribe homeopathically, constitutionally. Maybe the problem is dealing with the sugar craving, and then if we deal with that, then we could have less hot flashes, better sleep, better mood. And so the point where we come in homeopathically is not necessarily the hot flash. It may be constitutionally the whole person, and what's the single point that'll make the biggest difference? Well, for some people it'll be going to bed early. For some people it'll be the sugar craving. For some people it'll be dealing with anxiety. And so, you know, we're starting to merge into, well, how do we treat? What's the point we focus on? And we focus on the point that has the most profound root effect. And dehydration, of course, is required. Here, where it's 100 degrees and smoky, staying cool and hydrating and watching comedy, these are things that will make a difference. Have I missed anything? Okay, I'm caught up. Someone has suggested Karen Allen's work. So you might all look at Karen Allen's work. I'm not familiar with Karen Allen's work, but someone has suggested it. So this idea of here's a woman and she's having hot flashes and she's depressed and tired and having all kinds of cravings and her vagina feels dry and uncomfortable and all that. We have to start looking, what is the deepest cause that we can identify? Because you can get 10 women with hot flashes, and like I said, one, it's because she's low in magnesium and potassium, and it's destabilizing the walls of her blood vessels and the nerves that tell those muscles what to do. And it's a nutritional problem because she doesn't like vegetables. So of course, as you take your case, you're going to include aversion to vegetables on one level. So what's the deepest cause? And what if she's hypothyroid? What if she is hyperadrenalized? What if she has liver dysfunction? Treating these levels are extremely important. What if she's diabetic? If the blood sugars are very high, and I find, especially in women who have been diabetic since childhood, often their blood sugars are running much higher than someone who doesn't have diabetes, but it's maintained at lower. Normal is going to be somewhere under 100, and people with diabetes, their blood sugar can go up to 200, 300 and higher, and this creates inflammation in the body and all kinds of degenerative problems. So keeping the blood sugar balance is critical. Doing our best to keep our life stresses as manageable as possible, of course, is easier said than done, but is a player. So we have to match the plan to the cause. What changes can she make? And we can say, oh, you know, make your life less stressful, but if she's impoverished and she's working 3 jobs and she's got still children at home and older children come home and maybe she's by herself, I mean, it's all well and good to say, well, relax. But we're going to do the best we can within her finances, her supports. The plan has to match what's really feasible in her life, the changes she can make, and then we start from there. Because when we talk about obstacles to cure, well, we change the ones we can and we get her supports where we can. And homeopathically, we're looking, well, what level can we approach this on? Are we going to give a combo remedy for menopause? Are we going to prescribe on the acute level, the symptoms of her menopausal problems? Are we going to prescribe on her mental, emotional issues? Are we going to prescribe on the deep fundamental energy or sensation of it? That's going to depend, of course, on what's available, on what we know how to do, about what she's willing to do. And again, physically, we may have to do something physically to support her particular endocrine or organ dysfunction. For example, one of my earliest prescriptions homeopathically for a severely menopausal woman was a woman who had breast cancer. It was an estrogen-sensitive breast cancer, and she didn't even want to go near a picture of a soybean, never mind risk anything hormonally that might increase her estrogen levels. And basically the instruction she was given was, well, you know, just stay cool. And she came and we prescribed a totality prescription that included the hot flashes. That was a lachesis case and had beautiful results. And that was a great example of, really, we didn't change much else. All I did was prescribe homeopathically and very safely. We weren't tinkering with her organs or her estrogen levels. Really all we did, and all she was willing to do, was take that remedy. And so really we have a lot of tools. So where do we start? Well, first, we don't assume because she's going to be in menopause that there's going to be a problem. I've had many women come to me over the years who come in somewhere 45, 46, 47, and they say, I want to do something ahead of time to prevent having a difficult menopause. And that's great. That's really great. And so then we look at, okay, well, what are the problems we'd be most concerned about? And my biggest concerns for that woman would be her bone health, which is a whole other lecture, would be her cardiovascular health, and her mental health in terms of aging like a shining star, of aging like someone excited to wake up every day, who has a purpose in life, and whose heart works well and whose bones are dense. And we work with attitude and exercise and nutrition. And I always prescribe constitutionally. Of course, if she's coming to me, she usually wants that homeopathically. So we start with prevention. We start by living as healthily and well as we can from the get-go, and trying to find a stance in life where a woman sees value in her post-reproductive life. We remove the obstacles to cure, which we talked about. We strengthen constitutionally, and we can do that homeopathically and through lifestyle and through any other system of medicine, of healthcare that is constitutionally strengthening, and I would supplement if we need to. I prefer to provide nutrients with food, but not always possible. Again, depending on someone's motivation, emotional capacity. If someone says, I have no willpower, they don't really need a lecture on willpower from me. They need something that helps them find their inner strength. And that's going to be always for me homeopathy. And little goals that I know they can succeed at. And it might be as simple as getting them hydrated. I like to give people simple lifestyle tasks that they can succeed at that might really work. And it might be a little more protein. It might be some spinach in their blender. It might be some simple lifestyle task that they can succeed at. And as some of you have already said, I will give them an exercise assignment, which might be, I want you to walk around your house for a minute straight every day. I'll start and meet them where they are, but try and get them moving more than they do. Occasionally I get women who are over-exercising at this age, very rare. Okay, so let's talk about homeopathy. As I've already mentioned, there are many levels that we can prescribe on homeopathically. Ideally, I would start by a constitutional prescription, and most of you are homeopathy students, and so you know that the constitutional prescription looks at the whole of the person, who they are, what's happened in their life that's gotten them to this place, what's happened in the generations that precede them that's gotten them to this moment in time. And hopefully if we can find a similimum is the remedy that best matches the picture that they're presenting in the moment. That includes all of that history and their menopausal symptoms. Well, we're there. That's going to be beautiful. That's going to work fantastic. Like that Lacus's case I described was a deep constitutional prescription that, hey, it also covered their hot flashes. We might use what we call a lesional prescription. It's really more of a subacute prescription where we are looking at her specific hot flash and menopausal symptoms. And we're looking at only the changes, like any acute prescription, what's changed since the onset of menopause. And we'll look at everything. And it may be more than her vaginal symptoms and her hot flashes. It may be that she likes different foods or she likes different activities. And so again, we're looking at everything that may have changed in any way about her since the onset of menopause, everything. And usually when I'm doing this kind of, I'll call it subacute symptom, menopausal symptom, I'm prescribing for the menopausal layer, as we could say. I'm usually going to do a low potency, an LM potency, or a low potency like a 30C or a 12. And I generally, when I do this, I make liquid dilutions, and we figure out drops and dilutions based on how she responds and her sensitivity. And we have a lot of latitude here. There's many ways to do this. And some women will go and get a combination remedy, which isn't my general. I like to find something that's really a good fit for her. But definitely some women find relief, and that works for them. That's not my style. I have a question here. Are LMs needed if the client is on birth control pills? LMs, or low potency daily liquid dilutions that we can adjust and change, are usually what I do if someone's on drugs or hormones, but not always. And this is, so I'm now taking this question out of the context of this lecture, but sometimes even on drugs or hormones, because that's their steady state, that's their new natural, a single dose will work just fine. So that depends. Okay, so now we're going to talk about, well, how do we choose correct homeopathic medicine? And for you students, you know that what we look at, just like we said, is everything that's different since menopause.
Screen sharing as resumed.
I don't know if you can hear that screen sharing lady, but I don't know what she's saying. Anyways, note, first thing, everything, what might have changed? So the common menopausal symptoms. And the common menopausal symptoms will take us to the common menopausal remedies, which we'll talk about in a minute. We're also looking for changes of, as usual, anything that's different in the mood, in the mind, in the emotions, in the personality are our most important changes. And the generals, of course, for those of you who are non-homeopathy students, by generals, we mean something that's different about how the person feels as a whole. I am itchy, I am hot, I am hungry. Anything that's changed as a whole, where you can say, I feel, fill in the blank, we want to pay attention to those changes. I don't like the wind anymore, or I don't like animals anymore, or I love to be at heights. Whatever weird thing's different since your start in menopause is important. The mental, emotional symptoms and the changes in general, these are our most important symptoms. Let me go back a minute. Combo remedies at a low potency, only at a low potency. And really, they're not my first choice. I don't have any expertise in using combination remedies. And so low potency is where we would definitely want to go. You repeat many remedies at once, you could get approving. So you'd have to have someone else with more facility at combination remedies than myself. Okay, so other changes we'd look for are, organ function changes. What else is different? But the specifics or the particulars physically are always, and when we weight our symptoms to choose a remedy, not as important as our mental, emotionals, and our generals. That should be very, very basic for most of you. Okay, so also we look at what we homeopaths call our SRPs, our strange, rare, and peculiar. What's the weirdest thing that's different about you since menopause? That's what we want to know. If we can have a remedy that fits the mental emotional changes, the generals, and the strangest, most unique symptoms, that's what's going to get us the best choice of an effective remedy. And then we want to go deeper. So a woman has a hot flash. A woman's not sleeping well. The next question is why is that difficult for her? What is the problem for that woman in losing sleep? Because that tells us something deeper about who she is. So we can ask a woman, well, how does it affect you to be losing sleep? And I have found over time that I never know what she's going to say. And I'm often surprised. And the most important thing as a case taker is to quiet myself at the deepest level. Because even if I'm thinking really loudly, she may echo my thought. If she's a very sensitive woman whose case I'm taking, and I'm thinking, oh, well, probably these hot flashes are a problem because it makes her tired and crabby. Well, I'm telling you, she might just say my thoughts. I have got to quiet my mind and relax my mouth that wants to speak and drop my jaw and sit quietly and be really open to what her being wants to tell me about what's happening for her. And if the case veers off into something very unrelated to menopause, relax your body and open yourself to what she's telling you, because it's important, and that's how we get the deeper case. So someone who's having hot flashes and the problem is it's staining her clothes and she doesn't have money to buy more clothes, or someone who's having hot flashes because she's sweating and she loves sex so much that she's afraid she's going to be a useless person if she can't enjoy sex, or if she is afraid about her appearance, or whatever it is. I have no idea what she's going to say. And the quieter and more blank you can be, the more honest and open and far-ranging and more profound her response can be to you. That's the most important thing that I have to say to you really today as homeopaths. And it's almost 30 years for me now taking cases, and I am still learning, and this is my biggest lesson. I am still learning how to listen, and the listening comes from quieting my ideas, what I think she's going to say, my opinion about it, my experience in menopause, everything that's going on in me. The more open and the more, I would say, in wonder and amazement I am about her experience, the more she'll come forth with the deepest levels of her experience, and we can make a better prescription. And that is the point. Okay. You never know where you're going to go when you're teaching. So what are the common remedies that cover the common symptoms of menopause? Well, these are some of our heavy hitters in the top 10. Belladonna, lachesis, pulsatilla, sepia, sulfur. For those of you, most of you who have been studying homeopathy, we know that these remedies are generally, well, we could say hot and hormonal. So we're now going to talk about some of these remedies, and then we're going to talk about remedies grouped by overarching symptom pictures. So we're going to go at this backwards and forwards a little bit. The constitutional approach, the deep listening, as homeopaths, you go there first. If that's insufficient, then we go to this sort of subacute level. All right, so let's talk about these remedies, because most of you know these. But let's talk about how they would show up for menopause. First one I want to talk about is lachesis, the snake. And I mentioned it before in the post-breast cancer menopause case. And lachesis, as we know, for those of you who are new to homeopathy with us, you see I have these better and worse carrots. Oh, I was going to point to it on the screen, but that's not really going to help you. Greater than means the person who needs this remedy feels better when they have some discharge, and less than, or the little L on its side, means they feel worse with certain parameters. So someone who needs lachesis feels better if they have a discharge, and they feel worse if they lose a discharge. So these are women who feel worse before the period and better when they bleed. Or they feel better to talk a lot, blah, 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 get it out, express, talk, discharge. So menopause presents a conundrum to someone who's wired in the lachesis fashion, because she has lost her monthly discharge. And so this is often a time, we can think of it, a lot of women at menopause, their blood pressure goes up, or they get headaches, or they feel heavy or full. So basically, lachesis, someone who's wired in a lachesis fashion may often have problems with the loss of their menstrual lunar discharge. We also know that lachesis, their symptoms come on in their sleep. So for someone with a cough or asthma, they go to sleep and they wake up coughing or having asthma. So lachesis, of course, is going to come up for women who go to sleep and they wake up with hot flashes. They feel worse when they wake up. They get up in the morning and they feel awful. Sleeping makes them worse, whatever their problem is. So their problem, their hot flashes, their mood, their energy is worse when they wake up in the morning after having slept or in the middle of the night. Lachesis we associate with a bluish purple color. So these are some exciting hot flashes where they turn almost purplish red, right? Most women don't turn purple with a hot flash. As a matter of fact, most women don't turn nearly as red as they think they do. Some do. The nature of someone on a more constitutional level who might benefit from lachesis, they are loquacious. They talk, they express, they discharge. They tend to be suspicious and jealous. So if we were prescribing just based on the symptoms that had changed with the change in ovarian function, if she had always been trusting and easygoing and now she's suspicious and jealous, that would double your this is the thought that this might be her simillimum. The feeling in the head, so this is definitely someone who starts getting high blood pressure and palpitations. It's like that loss of discharge, there's too much in her. And so we have this bursting headaches, high blood pressure, palpitations. Of course, she's worse if she's hot, but that's a common symptom. I'm going to say all women with hot flashes, they're worse with heat. I suppose there's probably one woman in the world who's not, but I have not met her yet, but probably should show up next week. Lachesis is known for left-sided problems, so if she's now got, she developed the frozen shoulder on the left or a left-sided headache, that's more evidence for lachesis. There are a lot of throat symptoms. We think of the snake and the strangling, the sense of a lump or constriction, the aversion to have a collar. So someone who needs lachesis is never going to come in with a tight, high collar. Why? She's going to have an open neckline, no necklaces, no scarves. You have a clue right away. This is not your turtleneck hot flash, lady. This is low cut and open. And in general, she's overstimulated and things need an expression and an outlet. So that's a little overview of lachesis, how it might be related to menopause. Pulsatilla, most of you know well. So we know pulsatilla as a homeopathic remedy that is often present during hormonal changes. At menarche, the beginning of menopause, of menstruation, during pregnancy, premenstrually, we often see a pulsatilla pattern during a time of hormonal change. And I think menopause is very much like menarche. Menarche being the beginning of menstruation. Girls cycle hormonally for a year or two before they bleed. And you can see them. They start rolling their eyes and having intense food craving and weepy and moody and irritable monthly for a year or two before they bleed. And it's very helpful to notice that and support them in whatever way they need when they're experiencing somewhat premenstrual symptoms before the period. Menopause is very similar in the other direction. She stops bleeding, but she's still cycling. It's sort of like a perfect bell curve in some ways. And so if someone's going out the same way they went in, it might even be interesting to note what was she like at the beginning of her periods, what was she like premenstrually, and is she like that now? So what do we see with pulsatilla? All our classic pulsatilla keynotes, the absence of thirst, the fact that she really doesn't like a warm, stuffy room, that she wants fresh air. This is the remedy I like to describe it. She is driving in the car with the heat on and the window down. She's got the bedroom freezing and the window open, but big warm blankets. She doesn't want to be cold. She wants fresh air. she's a little stagnant, and we need to get her moving. So she feels better, right, with slow motion outside. She's not a fast runner. She's like that mottled appearance we see on the skin in pulsatilla. It's as if she's a little stagnant, and a little bit of gentle movement, a little bit of fresh air gets her circulation going. She feels better. So of course with pulsatilla we have the sweet, the weepy, well, sometimes the pathetic. It's a pathos state. She wants love, she wants affection, she wants attention, she wants to be held. But, you know, a lot of women, when they go into menopause, holding is an issue because you might want to be held, but it's too hot to be held. And so you have to differentiate. If the pulsatilla woman is not being held because she gets too hot, you'll know, because she'll say it'll be a problem for her. She really wants to be held, and she can't be held because it's too hot to be held, and that might make her cry, right? So she gets hot sweats at night from the heat, like common. They can be worse in the face. An important thing with hot flashes that can sometimes be helpful is, where does it start? Where do the hot flashes start? I would say most commonly women say it starts in the chest or the abdomen and it comes up. That's most common. Occasionally it starts in the face and it goes down. Recently I had someone tell me,
Screen sharing as resumed.
I know what it is. I touched the desk. Sorry. I'm getting all excited. Okay. So I had someone yesterday who said that she was getting a flush of heat across the lumbosacral area of her back that then came up her spine. So repertorizing, and for those of you who are not homeopaths, repertorizing means we look in our books to find out what symptoms, what specific symptoms are covered by what remedies. And so I repertorized that. That was a really, frankly, a peculiar, where the hot flash started in the sacral area and came up the spine. So that's something we want to really pay attention to, because most hot flashes are worse in the face. So, and many people, pulsatilla can be chilly in between the flushes. They also tend to thick, creamy discharges, like pulsatilla children have thick gland mucus from the nose, and so they may have a thicker, creamier discharge from the vagina during menopause because of the vulvar changes, the thinning and the more vulnerability. The more vulnerable the tissues, women can be more prone to infections, but sometimes they just have even sometimes more of a discharge without it being an infection, and that of course would make us think of pulsatilla. Our other classic PMS remedy, sepia, cuttlefish ink, is sepia we think of as our our taming of the shrew premenstrual remedy. That's probably kind of politically incorrect. Well, so sepia, the feeling sense in sepia that we have is irritability at little things, and we'll come back to that in just a second. So what do we see with sepia in menopause? Same thing, big sweats, worse at night. And with sepia, how does that sweat make her feel? It makes her feel weak. And so not everyone feels weak after a hot flash. I'm telling you, some women feel warmed up. They also have heavy bleeding during the perimenopausal time. And this can be a problem because I sometimes see women who they come in and they're extremely tired and exhausted and they get sick all the time. And what's the problem? Their problem is they're anemic from having all the heavy bleeding in a diet that can't compensate for it. So again, looking at root causes, sometimes it's the heavy bleeding, and we can help that by proper prescribing and nutrition, and then her energy will come back because, hey, she's not anemic. With sepia, we have that classic bearing down sensation, like with a bowel movement or with labor, the feeling of downward pressure in the rectum, in the vaginal and the pelvic floor area. Not only do we sometimes have the sensation, sometimes we have the actual uterus is pressing down, is lowering the pelvic floor, prolapse of the uterus or the bladder. And I want to say to you, if you're prescribing, well, what I want to say is prescribe for women who are dealing with prolapse. I think some of you have probably heard me say this in lectures, but the weirdest thing. It's like, is the remedy operating some kind of elevator? I have prescribed for prolapse, with common prolapse remedies like sepia, like Lilium tigrinum, like podophyllum, and I tell you, the uterus goes up. So there's some kind of tightening or toning that happens in the uterine ligaments, in the connective tissue in the area, but along with exercise, and sometimes it's surgical, but not usually. It's very, very important and helpful to prescribe homeopathically for prolapse. I have seen remarkable results with it. I have a question here. Is sepia the over-exerciser? Well, it sure can be because, of course, with sepia, we know she feels better after she exercises. The problem with sepia is if she doesn't exercise, because then she never feels better. Some of the sepia symptoms we see are hair loss, anxiety, headaches, palpitations, and back to our sinking sensation. But again, those common symptoms aren't going to take us to sepia. It's going to be the unique sepia factors that take us there. And so the unique sepia symptoms that we see are that special, everybody's doing it wrong state. The sepia mental state is, why are people driving so slow? Why is that person chewing like that? They smell terrible. Everybody's doing it wrong. People, and especially family members, people who you usually love, everything about them is annoying, irritating, overwhelming, unpleasant, and that's the sepia state. And then they can get very edgy and sarcastic, short-tempered. Of course, they feel bad about it afterwards, whereas Lachesis actually doesn't feel very bad about it afterwards. But sepia, they don't feel good about being nasty to the people they love. And they have like this second sense for what's really going to get them, and they may let out with some verbal zingers that are very hurtful. And that's a sign that it may be sepia, that they wouldn't do if they weren't what I like to call under the influence of hormones. And when she's under the influence, this nasty side can come out, and they can get hardened, flattened, kind of where they don't really feel much except irritable and angry or sad. They cry easily, but it's not like the crying easily of pulsatilla. It's just, they feel awful, really. But what makes them feel better is dancing, is exercise. So if someone tends to sepia-type symptoms, they need to go to the dance class. They need to turn on the tunes, and if they've still got kids, dance with the children. They need to be exercised. So if they're over-exercising, yes, we had a question, is sepia the over-exerciser? You can see how that would happen, but so could anyone if they had an eating disorder, if they had body image issues, if they were agitated, but sepia could be someone who exercised too much. I have to say, in this age group, I meet very few over-exercisers. I meet them, but very few. They tend to be on the chilly side. They tend to feel worse if it's cold in general. They may have an aversion to sex, although like exercise, if they can get over the aversion to it and they can have sex that they enjoy, it'll actually help them feel better. And they'll often say to me, why didn't I think of doing that before? Or they'll say, why did I do it more often, but then the aversion comes back in. And again, we have this heightened sense of smell in sepia. So sepia looks like a classic sepia premenstrual picture along with prolapse happening with menopause. Our good friend sulfur, the biggest representative in the repertoire. Well, it would be easy to think, okay, well, she's hot, we'll chill her down. And sulfur, certainly, what if the only symptom someone has is hot flashes and they keep her up, and that's the only problem, and she's fine, maybe better than ever, because she's so happy to not be bleeding anymore. Some women are thrilled to not have periods anymore. Some women, it's grievous to them. It's really different. Sulfur, they're going to be happy about it. Okay? So the keynote in sulfur is her heat. Some women don't just have hot flashes. They're warmed up all the time. If they've gone from being someone who's chilly often to someone who's now warm and hot all the time, then we're looking at our hot remedies. Typically, sulfur hot flashes begin in the chest and ascend. Their head feels hot, but again, you can say, all right, well, so all the remedies have this, right? They feel worse with any internal heat. So they eat spicy food, they drink a hot cup of tea, they eat hot food, and that heats them up. Anything that raises the calories in their body, anything that changes their temperature upward, they feel overheated. So, which brings up another point. People who love a hot cup of coffee in the day, caffeine, chocolate tea, mate, coffee is often hot flash inducing for people. So they need to figure out if that's true for them or not. And that's going to depend, of course, on their kidney function and adrenal function and liver function, whether that aggravates them or not. Back to sulfur. So they can have hot flashes day or night. And like the sepia, they can feel weak after a flush. Their hot flashes are worse in a room full of people, and that could be from the heat of the place or the crowd or just so much energy. Sulfur, they always feel worse if they're hungry. They feel worse at 10 or 11 in the morning. And of course, they're prone to skin expression of imbalances. There also tend, in women, sulfur women are rarely the ragged philosopher. In our culture, because of the showers in our society where we have good plumbing available to us, we rarely see the sulfur woman being the unkempt, lost in her thoughts kind of image. You can see that. You may see someone who's more interested in ideas than appearance, or bathing isn't that important to us, but she might be really well-groomed and a snappy dresser and still needs sulfur. And part of the nature that we see that makes her a sulfur woman is she tends to have a curious and a creative and a dynamic, sometimes chaotic nature, but she could be organized, but they're usually extroverted, they have a lot of energy, they like color, beauty, and so don't limit yourself by your stereotypes of sulfur. Okay, so now I'm going to look at the remedies again and group them by some of the common symptoms that we see with it. And what I want to say about this is, you know, you don't have to memorize this, and you can get a copy of the PowerPoint afterwards. I can send it to you, or you can get it through anymeeting.com or contact Barbara about that. So this is not where I want, there are a lot of details here that I don't want you to worry about memorizing or remembering. Just think about it, and you can get the details after, or of course in your Materia Medica. So what are the remedies, homeopathic pictures, that are associated with throbbing and pulsation? Some women in menopause, there's a pulsing quality related, of course, to their heartbeat. So our pulsing remedy par excellence is belladonna, our good friend belladonna. So what do we know about belladonna? You know everything about belladonna. The nature of the symptoms is they come on suddenly and violently, right? So this isn't your hot flash that comes on like, you know, a pot that's warming slowly. This is like my gas fireplace. You flip the switch and it's on. You go from off to on. This is boom, big hot flash. It didn't come on gradually, no warning. You were fine, and then you're boiling. And so a sudden and intense flush of heat. And associated with it is pulsing or throbbing anywhere in the body. So a woman might feel the pulsing in her ears, in her temples, in her throat, in her chest, in her palms, wherever you are more aware of the cardiac pulse. So sudden hot flash associated with pulsation. The face, belladonna, I always think of this red fire truck I have in my office. Belladonna is associated with redness, so her face might get pretty red, and it may actually burn. She may sweat. Now, quite a few remedies like petroleum have sweating around the genitals, but belladonna will get sweaty in the groin, around the vulva. And she might have a little belladonna feeling with it, a big excited state, maybe a big burst of anger. Many women, migraines get worse during the perimenopause and menopausal time. And so with belladonna, you may see the throbbing headaches. But migraines, if she's having migraines, we have to look at a lot of other factors as well. What other triggers are there, and what are the qualities of it. Belladonna perimenopausally, she may have a heavy, hot flow of blood during the charming phase of menopause where they bleed more often, heavier, and longer. I will just say, in my experience, as the periods change, one of the first things that happens is it seems like all bleeding all the time. She has heavier, longer periods. She'll bleed for 2 weeks, have a week off, bleed again every 3 weeks. There's the last hurrah bleeding. And it's important to check that to make sure that it's not endometrial cancer or something like that. But then usually she passes through that phase in 6 to 12 months, and then they get more erratic and lighter and less frequent. That's the most common pattern I see. So that if she's having that hot, heavy, hot, copious flow of blood and irritability and agitation, and she's red, and belladonna is usually low thirst. If she's got the classic lemon sour craving, you might think about belladonna, especially acutely for these hot flashes. Our next pulsar is, I don't know how to say it, glanoin. It's homeopathic nitroglycerin. And you can see, I hope on this slide, that we have a blood vessel that is contracted and a blood vessel that is dilated. Nitroglycerin causes a dilation of the blood vessels, which is where someone who's having angina, because there's constriction in the coronary arteries, they take nitroglycerin and it dilates. So that's what glanoin is. We dilate your blood vessels, and that's the proving. And the proving is that there's this intense surge of blood and heat to the head. So even though glanoin will have pulsatile quality, throbbing quality like belladonna, what's stronger here is the surge, the surging quality, that rushing, surging, flowing rapidly, intensely upward to the head. Now this is also a heart attack remedy, and so it's got, in terms of its application to menopause, we often will have cardiac type symptoms, which of course if one is having, it is important to get a cardiac exam to make sure that your heart's in good shape. So we have this intense heat, not necessarily as sudden as belladonna. It can have the pounding, the pulsing, but there's the surging quality is the symptom that we lean on here. And then if you have this surging quality in the head and they're confused, they get lost, they have a hot flash and they can't think straight, again, that's a strong symptom for glanoin. And this is a big remedy for heat stroke. Maybe I should have had it yesterday when I was out in the sun. So they get too hot, and being too hot aggravates them more than the average menopausal gal. So if they get too warm and it takes less warmth than someone else, they have worse symptoms. Whatever their symptom is, it's worse from being in the sun. Usually people who need this remedy, they know themselves, they're not out in the sun. Another remedy that I tried to include a few that maybe you don't know very well is amyl nitrate. Amyl nitrate was popular in the disco scene. It was what was called poppers. And this substance dilates the capillaries and the arterioles, causing flushing, and it can also cause kind of an erratic action of the heart. And again, we have this surging of blood to the head and the face, and then what happens, and notably happens, is they get pale. So we have throbbing like belladonna, we have surging like glanoin, but then we have this pallor. is paleness. And the throat and the heart can feel constricted. We have a constricted quality, also about the head. So we have qualities of belladonna and guanine, but then we have this constriction. And they throw off the covers. Now, throwing off the covers is a very common symptom of menopause. And women come in and I can't tell you, oh, I can't sleep, I wake up, I'm sweating, I throw the covers off, I'm freezing, I put them back on, and then you need a different cover for whoever else is in the bed, and you have to have a light one, but you need layers. This is normal and common, doesn't help us that much to find the remedy. We can commiserate, but it's kind of how it is. So they feel this weakness, this pallor, maybe trembling after this, and they feel stupefied or dulled down. There's also a feeling with amyl nitrate, because this is a stimulant of anxiety. And anxiety in the middle of the chest, this feeling like something might happen, something bad might happen. And this feeling of anxiety in the chest, I have found many women, there are 3 things that can cause this really commonly. 1 is panic or anxiety. 2 is reflux or heartburn. And the 3rd is the prodrome to a hot flash. And what I mean by the prodrome to a hot flash, I mean before a hot flash comes, there's a sensation in the body. And the sensation, the only way women who have nursed, it's similar to the sensation before letdown. Before a woman has, her milk comes down, there's like a tingling, statically, sometimes very unpleasant sensation. And it must be blood vessels and ducts starting to open. And most women, if they pay attention, I guess except for the belladonna sudden furnace, the blood vessels are starting to open. The information is getting through the nerves to the muscles of the blood vessels, and there's a sensation that precedes a hot flash. And that's usually when a woman wakes up, and then she has the hot flash. She thinks, oh, I woke up and I got a hot flash. But the prodrome is what woke her. And sometimes the prodrome to a hot flash can be interpreted as anxiety. And so I find for a lot of women, when they find out that the sensation in their chest doesn't, like they don't know what it is, so they interpret it as I must be anxious. But sometimes it's really just a little acid or it's the prodrome to a hot flash. And a lot of women are relieved to find out it's not anxiety. And if they can notice, oh, the hot flash is starting, again, calm themselves, cool themselves, you can really lower the amplitude of a hot flash. So amyl nitrate, amylinum nitrosum, may feel that impending anxious sense in the heart region. They're stiff when they're chilled, kind of like roost talks. They're restless, kind of like roost talks. And like sepia, they feel better to go out and exercise. So amyl nitrate has some of the symptoms of some of the other pulsars and throbbers we've talked about, but it's got some different keynotes, and you can explore this remedy. Okay, so what about women who are cold and they get hot flashes? So our remedy par excellence of a chilly gal who's sweating and getting hot is our common remedy, Calcarea carbonica. And calcarb, they always sweat easily, and they sweat even when they're cold. And something about Calcarea carbonica to remember is that she does better after she sweats. That it's messy, she may be dripping in sweat, but she feels better afterwards. And the part of the body where she sweats the most is her head and her face. So who is the Calcarea woman? Well, we'll come back. Pardon me, thinking about your question, but I think I'll finish Calcarea and then I'll come back to your question. Okay, so the nature of someone, if this is really who she is, she's constitutionally benefited from Calcarea carbonica, then her nature might be someone who's very responsible, has a very strong need to make sure everything is taken care of so that everyone has what they need, so the tasks are done, the house is taken care of. Her needs for protection and security lead to her sense of responsibility and can lead to her anxiety. She can feel apprehensive about life, about everything getting taken care of. She can even feel like she's losing her mind trying to get everything crossed off her list. So someone who comes into menopause about that, feeling like they cannot rest till they get everything done, and they really like to rest. Fundamentally, they like to be a couch potato, but they cannot rest on that couch till they've gotten everything handled. And of course, it's hard to get everything handled. And like belladonna, they can have heavy bleeding during the perimenopausal time, and they can also, like pulsatilla, have a vaginal discharge during perimenopause. And so that's who they are. And if they weren't this way and they became this way in menopause, well, we'd really think about them. But they are in that group of women who are chilly. And they have a hot flash, and then they're just right back to being chilly. It's characterized by the big head sweats and her nature. And of course, calcarea has a tendency to be constipated, to have a slowed down urge to a bowel movement. And peculiar about calcarea carbonica is they actually feel better when they're not having bowel movements. And when they have more bowel movements, they don't actually feel as well. Okay, I have a question here. Do belladonna and guanoinum help during an acute attack of a hot flash? And have I used them to reduce their frequency and intensity in the long run? But I follow up with a deeper remedy for long-term effect. Okay, so I never try and medicate a hot flash when it's happening, because hot flashes don't last very long. They seem like forever when they're happening. Most women's hot flashes last a minute, 2 minutes. A long one is 4 minutes or 5 minutes. I have met women who say they get a surge of heat for 20 minutes. This is very unusual. By the time you get the remedy out and take it, the hot flash is over. This would be, we don't medicate the hot flash. We give the remedy daily, 2-3 times a day, to maintain her balance in the face of the untuning aspects of menopause. So, and also, I think that the stance of when we feel something uncomfortable inside us and we reach for something outside us to make it better, to medicate the moment, this is something that philosophically I try not to do, because it puts the locus of control outside of the woman. I think to modulate the effect of a hot flash while it's happening, we're not going to take something for it. We're going to calm down. We're going to have some ice water. We're going to put a cold pack on the neck. We're going to relax. We're going to laugh. Something easy. So I don't give a remedy during a hot flash, because they're usually quick. And I don't like the model of medicating every moment of discomfort. But I may have them take it twice a day, 3 times a day over time, and I may give them that remedy if that's constitutional for them eventually, or monthly or weekly. It would depend on the person, really. We'll talk a little bit more about potency as we go along. But I think the question's good, because I don't want to give you the impression that I want to medicate hot flashes. I want to medicate the tendency to hot flashes. Gramphites is another remedy picture that they tend to be very chilly, very sensitive to cold. And we know Gramphites as a remedy that has skin issues, rashes with the honey-colored scabs, and it's like an impetigo remedy. But constitutionally, they seem similar to calcarea in some ways, and they also have flushing and then pallor, like amyl nitrate did. They can get very red, but then they get very pale. They get the rush of blood, the rushing, surging, like we saw in Glenoid. But their circulation is erratic in general. They have irregular circulation, meaning one part can be hot, another part can be cold. They don't have a balanced, smooth circulation, and they're very sensitive to cold. If they become less able to heal wounds and cuts during menopause, if that was one of the strange things that changed since menopause, then we would think of Graphites. Graphites is also a remedy where we see heavier bleeding and more vaginal discharge during perimenopause. They tend to have the increased body fat and constipation that we see with calcarea in menopause. And I should speak about truncal obesity. Gaining weight around the middle is often a sudden and unwanted change in menopause. And in Graphites and calcarea, we may see more of a tendency to this. And of course, there's no easy answer to that, but I would, of course, in working with the diet and with exercise, focus on those areas. Graphites tends to get very, very excited about little things. A small change, something somebody says, they get easily, extremely excited, and they want to tell about what happened to them and what they saw and what someone said, and as soon as they can talk about it or share it with someone, they feel better. They go back to neutral. That's why I have a quote from Shankar in here.
Screen sharing as resumed.
That says, he says, they're like a tuning fork that starts vibrating easily with something, and then when you touch it to something else, then they calm down. That's something about the nature of Graphites. They're paying attention and getting excited about all kinds of little things, and they must talk about it. So they're one of our chili remedies that looks like calcarea, but they have this different emphasis, this excitability and maybe a tendency to the skin issues. Okay, a whole other area are women who experience musculoskeletal concerns during menopause. And one of the very common remedies that I use during menopause is homeopathic Cimicifuga, which is interesting because this is black cohosh that a lot of women take herbally. And Cimicifuga is sort of a place where Ignatia and Sepia meet. They feel gloomy and sad and down. The image I already have is, you know, the character Pigpen and Charlie Brown, not because they're down, but this is like heavy dark cloud following everywhere they go. This is Eeyore. This is doom and gloom. And they feel down and care about things. They become apathetic about their responsibilities. And then on the other hand, they can be all agitated and irritable. And so we have these qualities, kind of lachesis, Ignatia, Sepia, all in one. And like Ignatia, like Ignatia, Cimicifuga, they sigh. Odd pleasures. Oh. Right? They're big sighers. So if they walk in and they're taking big sighs, they're holding tension in their chest and they're releasing it. Big sighers, you think right away, Cimicifuga, also Ignatia, Calcarea phosphoricum. But the keynote, along with the Cimicifuga menopausal picture, is that this stiffness in the neck and the upper back. They have contracted muscles. They have difficulty turning the head, a crick in the neck, kind of like we'd see in causticum. But it's a real keynote that they have this muscular, aching, sore, tense, stiff, twitchy, this contracted jerkiness of the muscles. They're jerking in their sleep, which also very much like causticum or cuprum, but it often means they have a mineral deficiency. So if I see arthritic joint pains, it kind of looks like rooftops in some ways, and this doom and gloom, irritable state, I look at Cimicifuga. I recently had a very dramatic case of someone who had migraines since the onset of menopause, but she had all these other joint symptoms and the doom and gloom and depression, and we did Cimicifuga and all her headaches went away and her mood cheered up and the symptoms, you know, all those things that happen with homeopathy. A remedy you may never have heard of is Aristolochia clematis that I just, again, wanted to expose you to because it is, it's got some specific joint problems, heaviness in the extremities, cold extremities, and you can read about Aristolochia. Some women, the emphasis is really on the perspiration. And if perspiration is the big problem, then we look at a couple of remedies, one being China. And I'm mostly going to mention these because I feel like you can look up the details. Good old cinchona, Hahnemann's original remedy. They sweat a lot, drenching sweats, they're weak and exhausted. And they may be red and hot, but their hands are cold, and the classic China bloating. Sulfuric acid, big sweaters. Again, sweating's the heart of their symptom picture, and they can feel weak with it. But what are the keynotes of sulfuric acid? Well, they can have the prolapse. There's this weakness of their connective tissue. They feel hurried. Hurriedness is a very important symptom in sulfuric acid, and they bruise easily. So that's what I want to say about sulfuric acid as a big sweater. Jaborandi, I think you can read about, and we'll come back to it. Yes. Oh. One of the questions was about restless legs. Yes, the restless legs is a little different than just sudden jerks, but restless legs definitely can look at can look like causticum or any of our other herky-jerky remedies. I have another question here. Do I use the cell salts sometimes? I do use them sometimes, especially with deficiency symptoms like in osteoporosis or osteopenia. Okay, what if, I'm going to talk about, what if the mood's the biggest change? So then I'm going to look at remedies like Ignatia, where they will have their classic, what we call it, hysteria. They're just very uncomfortable, emotional reactions to things where, you know, you can, if we think of Ignatia as a place where the difference between the real and ideal meet, and she feels a spasmodic, breathing, uncomfortable state, well, menopause is certainly a time where what your ideals and vision for your life may meet what it really is, and if the response is this spasmodic, breathing, uncomfortable place, then we really want to think about Ignatia. What if headaches are the main symptom you see? Well, we talked about sanguinaria, we talked about belladonna, we talked about guanylin, we talked about simicifuga. Really, any homeopathic remedy might, that's the synonym for headaches, might show up. But I did want to talk about sanguinaria, which is also known for big flushes of heat to the head, where they get hugely red and they may feel nauseous and vomiting. This is also a sinus infection remedy. So they may have the same symptoms in a sinus infection. But in menopause, if it's all about the head and the face and all this pressure, bursting starts in the back of the head, the occiput, comes up and over, especially on the right. Maybe her sinuses hurt worse. And then she feels sick, nauseous. Think about sanguinaria. We just have, I'm going to do a few more slides. We have a few more minutes, so if you have more questions, it would be good to type them in soon. Xanthocxylum, also an unusual remedy for headaches. I'm going to suggest that you read about it. So how do we know? We want to know, is she hot or cold? Is she having hot flashes? What makes them better or worse? What else has changed? Where do the differences lie? And it could be anything. I've tried to mention many different kinds of changes. It could be anything from how her wounds heal to what happens in her sinuses. Look for those, repertorize them, decide on the level of the case. And then you would decide your potency depending on your depth and your surety. and make sure you repertorize. And for those of you who don't know what repertorizing is, that's your next step of learning. There's online repertorization sites, and there's great books. So what if it's not, what else do I do besides homeopathy? Well, mostly I try, like I said, and find the source, what's weak or strong in their body. I wanted to list just some common supplements that people use. The soy I already talked about. Black cohosh, although some studies have said it doesn't make a difference, many women it does. A good quality, standardized extract of Simicifuga, a capsule morning and night can go a long way. Sage tea will inhibit sweating. It dries women up, so that can be good or bad. Many women are deficient in B vitamins, deficient in essential fatty acids. I want them to try and get it from their diet. If their liver is ineffective at metabolizing and balancing estrogens, I will often use broccoli extract called DIM, or diindolylmethane methane. And maca is an interesting plant from South America that's an adaptogen, meaning it helps people deal with stress, but it seems to focus on the reproductive tract. So the important thing, I think the most important thing in using homeopathy for menopause is to really know what level you're prescribing on. And if you're prescribing just acutely and you decide this is a classic sanguinaria, a simple approach like a 30C twice a day can go a long way. I usually don't, I might give it a 200C once a week or once a month if I'm completely certain about it and she responds well to it. But these issues of potency, well, there's a lot of answers to them, but don't overdo it. If she has a bad reaction to the remedy, you're proving it. So I want to use it as little as possible to see an overall improvement. And the other thing to consider is that even though she's not bleeding, she may be cycling. And so she may be having bad hot flashes 1 out of 4 weeks. And that's not because your remedy's not working, it's because that's the more challenged part of your cycle. And so she may not need the remedy if you're doing it acutely like that 2 weeks out of the month. And then she may need it twice a day 2 weeks out of the month. So you want to be aware she's cycling and give the remedy not by rote or formula, but by how often she needs it. So I think we have 3 minutes left. Is that right? And if you have any other questions, this would be a good time. This has been an interesting process. I'm staring at the camera in this computer like it's you. And I know it is you. So it's been very nice to chat with you. And do we have any other questions? We're good? Be well, stay cool, stay hydrated, eat well, and watch comedy. Bye.
Screen sharing is paused. Click on the selected application to resume sharing.